The purpose of this series is to gain practical information regarding the specific relevant job skills expected from instrumentalists and vocalists. My intention is to introduce working artists from various genres and provide an opportunity to learn what is generally required and expected from instrumentalist and vocalist in a professional working environment. For those of you watching this, try to look for consistent answers and complaints from each guest artist to arrive at a general consensus regarding your instrument or voice that might improve your job skills. So right now, I'd like to introduce the first guest, and this is actually John Ferraro. So say hi to everybody, John.
Hi there. Glad to be on board. Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me. What a privilege to be with you.
Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
So why don't we begin by telling our viewers about your accomplishments, such as who you've performed with, along with any other notable work, such as session work?
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I mean, this might take a while, but I'll try to condense it. Recent credits are doing some of the Rod Stewart Standards albums. There's 5 editions of that. So I was on the West Coast production team that Richard Perry produced.
Nice.
And also been doing some live touring dates with Burt Bacharach, mostly in Europe, and then overseas. We've gone to Australia twice. And then other credits include the great Larry Carlton, who I started with when I was 23 years old, and there's a lot of video footage of that you can see. Also Boz Scaggs live 2004 video that you can see, and I'm going to send these links. But primarily behind the scenes studio session drummer, worked with a lot of different singers, songwriters. Most recently, I just was looking at a picture I had here from 1992. I got a chance to play with the late, great Eddie Van Halen with a group that's called Biff Babies All-Stars, but it also has an album out more recently. It's called the Mutual Admiration Society, and that features a number of great guitar players that are mostly Music Man, Ernie Ball endorsees.
Sure.
So I'm one of the producers, along with the president of the company and bass player and guitar player Sterling Ball. And our other friend, Jim Cox, who's a wonderful keyboard player, whom I met at Cal State Long Beach back in 1976.
Now, you mentioned studio work. Maybe you could tell some of our audience what studio work you've done.
Sure. Real quickly, before I forget, David and I played together with David Benoit. That's how we got a chance to meet.
That's right. That's where we met.
I'll go back to the early days. I mean, I started, like I said, in the 70s. And back then, this was prior to MIDI, so this is sort of an important point maybe for younger players. I was very fortunate that I was able to get called to do demo sessions for singers and songwriters. So what that meant for me was a chance to come in to the studio with different drums I wanted to try, different gear, snare drum tunings, work with different engineers, different microphones, kind of get exposure. Obviously, the main takeaway, and this has been true all my career with most of the studio work, is how to play with a click. Nowadays, as a session player, you have to know how to do pretty much everything yourself. So, but as far as my experience has been, everything from overdub sessions just by myself. I like to call it underdubbing the groove. So someone already has all their tracks done. They've got loops, they've got clicks, all their parts are there. And I come in and play underneath what's there and add the final touch. This is kind of ironic because when I first started playing, I would be playing along with records with headphones and, trying to keep up with the track that was going on and learn the music that I enjoyed. So it's kind of, in a sense, come full circle that now I'm playing along to pretty much a finished product and I'm just adding the final touch. But, the drums are a very important part of the, what I like to call the engine room, where you're down there on the bass level, creating the right sound, the right groove, the right dynamic range, all of these components. So, However, I know which microphones that I personally like, the way they sound. And so if I see some miking technique with an engineer that I haven't worked with before, then I might look, that's a kind of an odd spot to put the kick drum mic or an overhead mic or the snare mic.
Good way to learn, though.
And then I always reserve judgment until I hear it, but other times it's like, hey, I have to call the engineer into the room to listen to the drums and say, here's what they sound like. And in my opinion, the job of the engineer is to capture that sound rather than try to enhance it with a ton of EQ and gating and all these things, because then now you've lost all the dynamic range and you're just turning it into a sample data collection session, which there's an element of that, but in my opinion, the engineers should be kind of open-minded with keeping, the levels correct for the dynamics. Sometimes you're playing brushes, so that whole structure changes as far as the dynamic range. And a lot of guys, you're doing a project and you're in there to do 8 songs in a day. Some of the guys will just get drum sounds at 9:30 a.m. Okay, we're all good to go. And they'll just leave it there rather than, okay, this next song the guy's going to play brushes. This next song is kind of bashy rock. Oh, the next song is a country thing with side stick. So all of these components, in my opinion, need to be paid attention to as you're tracking, rather than, oh, don't worry about it, we'll fix it in the mix. The flip side is when you leave the studio, you go, oh, this is sounding really good. Then months later, you get sent the project, you go, oh my God, what happened? The drums sound like crap. So, you don't really have to do too much, in my opinion, if you've got good sounding gear with a guy that knows what he's doing, and just kind of let it be what it's going to be, rather than trying to go plug in haywire, happy, and over tweak stuff. I mean, obviously people want to put their touch on it as a producer or, engineer / producer. But my favorite guys are the ones who are musicians or have a very musical sensibility rather than a numbers guy with the pencil pusher pocket, protector.
How did you originally begin in music?
I've been a professional drummer since I was basically 14, because I think my first job was in high school as a freshman playing at California with a Dixieland band at the Santa Anita racetrack for an event. We were in the infield. So, I got started then. I've always known that I wanted to play music. Fast forward, many years later, had a very fortunate to have a career playing lots of secular music and also doing church worship music as well. But started out at Disneyland here in California.
How did you begin establishing yourself as a professional rather than as a student or hobbyist? Was it a gradual process? And if so, how did you support yourself in the beginning stages?
Great question. So definitely, graduating high school and knowing, the thing I did best was to play music, to play drums. So went to a junior college here locally in California. I'm coming to you live from Newport Beach, California, but really great music program at Orange Coast College, junior college here, and they still have a great program. So I decided to go there, and then I transferred to Long Beach State, which is, Long Beach, California, where I met a whole bunch of lifelong friends at both of those places that I still work with today. So as far as the gradual process, it's an interesting kind of word of mouth deal. I mean, now it's changed so much because of internet and, social media. Right. But back then, one of the things we would do is just get together and jam in a practice room. And then you'd meet somebody that knew somebody else that might have a chance to, hey, do you want to go play this gig tonight? Or do you want to go to this jam session tonight? You just make yourself available for all of these type of situations as a player to engage with other musicians. And then it's, a network, obviously, and we all try to help each other. And, I'll get references. Hey, who do you know for bass? Well, let's get David Enos, of course. Right. So, and then, vice versa with singers and band leaders. But I guess I don't have an exact answer to say, here's what you do. But I think there's, a number of things to consider. Obviously, the main thing is your attitude. I think you have to be a workable person. When I watch all these YouTube video nows of some amazing drummers, they're great, but I don't know if they've ever gotten a chance to play with people. And what ends up happening, in my opinion, is you get what I like to call practice room musicians, where that's all they know how to do is play their thing, and it's 100% them. Playing with other people, that dynamic changes, which I like to call the pie concept. So, if you're playing in a jazz trio, well, guess what? It's 33 1/3 if you slice that pie for each guy. So we're listening, we're playing together. If you're playing with a big band, maybe it's 16 or 18 piece, then the pieces of the pie get smaller, and so on and so forth. So just those are some practical awareness tips about listening. It all boils down to that. But getting the experience too, you have to sort of challenge yourself and be willing to make mistakes and take some criticism. But the biggest takeaway I would leave you with this is to not let your ego interfere with your attitude, because people might be short with you and say, hey, that sucks. That's not the right thing. So that's kind of a harsh statement. So if you're pouring your heart and soul into what you're doing, thinking, wow, I'm playing some great stuff. And they say, wait a minute, that's horrible, or that doesn't work. Now you're leaving yourself exposed where your feelings are involved and you're going to get, a little, stomped down. So don't take any of that personal. Some of my mentor players would probably be the first to talk about that, with the great Hal Blaine, who's on thousands of albums. He would just
and on
say,
thousands of sheet music.
yes, that's right.
He used to stamp
Yeah.
his mark on it, right? He had a little stamp
Yeah.
that he would stamp on sheet music.
Right. Again, yeah, I saw many of those charts playing with the recordings. I worked with Vicky Carr and some other artists, Barry Manilow, and you'd see that stamp on some of the charts. So that was his thing. He would come in, open up the music, grab this rubber stamp like an old style, boom, Hal Blaine, strikes again.
Yeah.
So here's the guy who's an iconic, not maybe as well known to the public, but he's on thousands of albums. And
Absolutely.
this workability thing, back to that topic, is, easygoing guy, well qualified, great sounding drums, can read, can play with a click, play the right dynamics, all these elements, which kind of get taken for granted, but you have to, as you're learning, be open and willing to improve on those areas that are weaker. So sort of jumped around. I don't know if I covered all of your topics on the question, but to me, a lot,
great answers. I remember we had some college students come up. They were doing a paper for the class, and I was really impressed with your answer, because it was like, what's important for you as a drummer? And I remember you saying, really listening, and rather than, be this, it's all about me kind of thing, it's like, how can I be supportive with the other musicians, and listening to what they're doing, reacting and responding, and deciding how to orchestrate around the kit. So I was really impressed with that particular answer.
Oh, well, thank you, David. I remember we did that gig a couple of times, and there were these students that were there to sort of audit the class, and they were taking notes, and it was great to interact with them. I'm sure, I don't even know if most of them were aspiring musicians. A few of them were, but others are just, general public that wants to kind of know what's going on up there on the stage when you're playing, especially when you're playing jazz, because it's a very interactive art form, very dynamic. So thank you for the nice compliment about that, but also reminding myself to pay attention to those details.
Is there a recipe for success, or a specific way to become a professional musician or vocalist, or are there multiple ways of achieving success? Is going to college important? If so, why?
Wow. This is going to be a hard one to unpack. Okay. Recipe for success, I think at the end of the day, in most professions, people would probably say, just be yourself and be confident. If you're satisfied with the effort that you've put forth, then you should be satisfied with that result that you get. I think just doing your best and feeling good about the fact that you're offering the best of your ability in each of those situations. And then, having good habits, obviously, so, kind of keeping it. I think you have to, first of all, back to the idea of treating it as a profession and kind of taking it serious, the whole image of sex, drugs, rock and roll. I think that's, been toned way, way down. There's been all those tragic deaths of some of the rock stars who have died like that. But, the more modern bands, or even some of the old school bands, these guys are in their 60s, 70s, and they're still going strong because they've, honed in what it is they're doing and gotten rid of some of that craziness. So, and step-by-step recipe, that's really great. I mean, it's kind of, there's definitely some luck involved. I mean, as far as being in the right place at the right time. That's how I got my break with Larry Carlton. A real quick story. I was coming back from a jazz ensemble festival up in Cal Berkeley with a bunch of the bands from California. So I was playing with one of the big bands. We had 4 bands at Long Beach State. So we all drove up on the bus, and it was for on a Thursday for the Friday, Saturday competition, and Sunday the thing was over. So rather than get back on the bus Sunday morning, a couple of us said, hey, wait a minute, we're right near Oakland Airport. Let's just buy a one-way ticket. I think it was called PSA was the airline back in the day. This is before Southwest. So I said, okay, let's go for it. So we all, buy the tickets. 7 a.m. flight. We stayed up probably till 3, just hanging out and visiting other musicians. I get home, I'm back. At the time I was still living at my parents' house, and the landline rings around like 1, and it's a friend of mine named Carlos Rios, really great guitarist who played with Gino Vanelli, also Lionel Richie, not Stevie Nicks. He's got tons of credits. So we were buddies because we'd play with a girl named Cindy Greco. So quick story here. I'll try to keep it quick. Hey, John, what are you doing today? You want to come up and play at Hula Hands in Redondo Beach Pier at 4:00? Like, oh, okay, sure. So it's like kind of a jazzy thing with a saxophone player named Richard Elliott, who's well known, and a couple other local guys, Rich Wenzel, keyboard player, bass player. And we're just doing sort of cover tunes of that time. Some of the stuff was like Bob James, and LA Express was popular, Tom Scott. Anyway, so unbeknownst to me, I knew that Carlos Rios was friends with Steve Carlton, who's Larry Carlton's cousin. So we're playing the first set, and in walks Larry Carlton. Like, holy shit. So, I knew what he looked like because I'd seen his picture. But long story short, we end up finishing the gig, and then Larry says, hey, you want to come up to my house and jam with the guys in the band? So now it's like 10 o'clock at night. We drive all the way up to his house. Then he called me back two more times to sort of audition with his guys, and I got the gig. So the point of that story was, like, if I had gotten on the bus, I would have missed that complete chance to do that. You go down the list, call the next guy. So sort of a fate thing, and God was watching over me, so it put me right there. And all of a sudden, we're talking about the stamping of the music. Well, getting a chance to work with Larry Carlton was a pretty heavy duty stamp of approval. Like, okay, you're in. It's like, whoa. So that opened doors for me to start doing jingles with some companies, and then he would refer me for other sessions to play. I'm trying to think what the other part of your question was.
Is going to college important? If so, why?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it is, but at the same time, it doesn't guarantee anything. And that's the problem. Right. There's sort of a going joke, and I hate to even say it, I'm hesitant, but I see ads on Craigslist if I'm looking, or I talk to people. Hey, I'll just keep it anonymous. I'm a so-and-so graduate. Oh, great. Well, so what does that means? One of two things in the minds of people that might be hiring you, versus the scenario of like, oh yeah, I started out at so-and-so, but then I got called by so-and-so to go on the road. So you got kind of plucked away from the school because you were a top player. And this has happened to several well-known friends of ours who shall remain nameless, keep it kind of anonymous. So back to the topic. Yeah, the education is important, but it doesn't guarantee you a position. I think of it almost as a backup plan. And nowadays there's so many, trade schools online that you can get the skill level that you need in order to be a professional. And I would say to study everything, songwriting, engineering, obviously learning how to use one of the programs, as well as playing. You have to do it all in this day and age, it seems like, and more so. And even video, that's our our new frontier of content. Everybody wants video content. Yeah. So yeah, school thing, but to spend $50,000 plus a year at some of these places, boy, you come out of there and you're going to have $250,000 of debt.
How important is persistence and determination in this industry?
Oh, it's extremely important. It requires a lot of sacrifice, not only from the person that's trying to do it, but the people around you. What's your support system for that? Number of guys are not able to just make it unless you can get into a band that's working, constantly, maybe 5 nights a week. And, there again, you're hoping that the exposure or original projects, and, we both have done probably hundreds of those type of projects. So, you've got to be, treating it like a business is important.
Every profession has specific occupational skills required to obtain work. For example, an architect must know geometry to be able to build a house. To this end, I'd like to get your opinions and perspectives on common job skills you feel are required for you as a professional musician or vocalist. Let's begin with sight reading or sight singing. Is this a necessary job skill for you as a musician or vocalist? And if so, how does it help you gain employment? Do sight reading or sight singing expectations change according to work environments? For example, how does sight singing or sight reading expectations change from a top 40 band to studio work? How about for other musicians or vocalists? Is this an important job skill for them?
Very important, because it opens doors. It gives you opportunity to step right in without any rehearsal, in theory, to just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And, I would say at least 60% or more of the work I do might entail that. So it is important. So you have to spend time preparing how to do that, practicing with different books and challenging yourself to read maybe some different time signatures, which I'm not real good at, to be honest, but I understand the concepts of it and to try to be able to count them. So it's real basic rudimental rhythm ideas for this instrument. Then, of course, we talked about earlier the orchestration of those rhythms. So you have to have a skill level to be able to execute it. If it's a small group, you might approach the same song one way versus if it's with a big band in the jazz genre. So, yeah, sight reading is very important. It opens doors. If you don't know how to do it, you can still communicate your ideas, maybe with lead sheets. A lot of the church gigs I do, I call them tone poems. So you'll get a sheet that's got lyrics on it, and they'll have A, G, F sharp, C7, a bunch of chord symbols placed over the top of the notes, over the top of the lyrics. So that tells me absolutely nothing until someone picks up the guitar and goes jang, 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 or they go jing, jigga, jigga, jang, jigga, jigga, jang, jigga, jigga, jang. So right away, there's two different tempos. There's two different time signatures. You got 4/4, or you got 6/8. So to hear that and determine that, and then you can make your own notes. But a typical music staff chart that's got treble clef, bass clef, understanding how to read a lead sheet and a drum specific parts. Those are two different animals too. I prefer a lead sheet because it'll have the melody and the structure of the song and chord changes. And my trick when I get lost, not if, but when I get lost and I'm reading charts, it'll say play 32, and then you'll see another section that might say, oh, here comes all these chords. And okay, I'm not sure where I am, but watch, there's da, 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 and a measure. Oh, wait, there we are. There's that measure that has those 4 chord changes in it. So now I'm back on track. And, the great thing about this instrument is you're not necessarily responsible for making the harmonic changes. So we can get away with kind of a lot of, what's the word, discretion, or, you're not having to make the chord changes, which I'm always in amazement of. David can come in and sight read it and be listening to the way the piano player is altering the changes right there on the spot. And it's remarkable to me, the depth of knowledge that, the other rhythm section players have: guitar, keyboard, bass, and then the soloists too. They can hear the altered chord and play some scales that are fit appropriately. So yeah, sight reading, it's not that hard. It's basic math. It's whole, half, quarter, sixteenths, and then the triplets, and then everything else is related via the time signature.
Right. That's actually really interesting to me. I didn't actually realize that you were doing it, but you're actually, as a drummer, you're actually reading the chord changes. You're just using them you're looking for the same patterns, right? Is that correct?
Exactly right. That's when I'm shaping the sound of a chord. If I hear a really cool altered gospel chord, it inspires me, like, oh man, it's got such a neat sound. So I'm thinking about those progressions, and I've got to say I've been blessed with a pretty good recall or memory ability that helps me to use different songs that I'm hearing the sound of as templates, chord progressions, and I go, oh, that kind of reminds me of this. And so now I've got a start point to play something that was maybe on a record that I'd listened to, within the last 40 or 50 years.
How important is having good timekeeping skills?
Well, that's kind of extremely important, because that's kind of what we're being called to do.
Right.
However, my concept on that in this day and age is everyone, is either recording themselves or playing along. So you have a chance to see where you are on the grid. What's my tendency? I don't care what instrument it is. Are you playing ahead of the beat, playing behind the beat? Every one of us has a different tendency, or what's the right word? That you're naturally going to feel a time in a certain spot. So certain rhythm section guys, you don't have to even talk about it or think about it. Other guys are going, hey, can you help me out here with maybe playing a little more on top? Oh, okay. or I'm pulling guys back because, oh my God, this band rushes like crazy, so let me sit way on the backside of the beat. So those are kind of micro managed little moments, but understanding how to keep steady time and the different variations, especially on this instrument. But yeah, timekeeping, that's the name of the game. You know, you're not going to get referred or develop a good reputation for your job pursuit if you don't have solid time. Word travels fast, and
Right.
you know, there's everybody's got their when a name comes up, they might have an opinion about it. Of, oh no, that guy doesn't know, or oh yeah, he's got a great time. So each person has a different perspective of what it is we do as session players.
How important is good ear training? How has it helped you in a professional working situation? Perhaps to be able to hear your way through a piece of music you don't know? How did you develop your ear training?
Yeah, the ear training kind of tying into the theory idea. And along with the ear training means you have to go out and listen to things, voluntarily, or, when you're watching the news at night or whatever, if you're online, if you're in your car, you're being bombarded with music all the time. And this, real quick, I'll just say, people always, if I meet strangers or neighbors, hey, what do you do? Well, I'm a musician, I would play the drums. Oh, really? What band are you in? So, well, I'm not really in any one band, but my comeback is if you own a radio, TV, or a car stereo, you've heard me play hundreds of times. They're like, well, really? What do you mean? What song is it? Well, because you've got commercials that are being played. You've got maybe TV show themes, movie soundtracks, all these kind of behind the scenes music support situations, that we have been engaged in professionally for a long time. So that's a neat thing to think about. Most parents are horrified when their kid says, oh, I want to be in a band, or I want to be a musician. Well, you can do it, but it's such a small percentage of guys that are going to be as big as the Rolling Stones, or whatever pop band is happening, or a singer. I want to be the next Beyonce. I want to be the next whoever it is that you're idolizing. And a lot of those singers have been around for a long time. Some of them become what we call flavor of the month. So they're in there for a period of time and then they disappear, they fall away. So I've been fortunate. My goal was to be able to play in the studios, and I got very influenced, obviously, meeting Larry Carlton, who was a studio giant and still regarded that way. And some of those drummers that he had playing around him, some of my influences, obviously, Jeff Porcaro, John Guerin, Hal Blaine, we talked about, Jim Keltner, J.R. Robinson, Vinnie Colaiuta. There's so many of them. It's a really long list of cats. Sure. But the ear training, this, like I said, it comes from exposure. Sometimes you're not even consciously aware of it. But there's always, you're waiting in an airport lounge. We were just talking about this yesterday. You go to the grocery store and you're hearing stuff on the house system. So we were walking down one aisle and it's a Beach Boys tune. And I'm hearing this like percussion thing that I'd never heard before because it's just the one side of the mix. And it's like, oh, wow, what's that? I didn't know that was on there. Or an organ part that's tucked away on, it's funny. So your brain, for me, I have the problem where it doesn't shut off. So I'm always hearing or thinking about stuff. And, kind of stocking the stockpile of your memory thing. And it can get you in trouble. I'll tell you a quick story where when I was younger, I'd be on a session and somebody would have a song that might go, just dun 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 dun. You go, well, that sounds like a Rolling Stones song, and they're like, really? What do you mean? Wait a minute. They get all freaked out. You just got to keep your mouth shut, even though the riff is very similar to a lot of different songs that might be popular around that time.
Yeah, that's definitely that's definitely a work skill, learning when to keep your mouth shut, especially in session work.
Yes, that alone is very valuable. And I've talked to guys who were session players that kind of got fed up with it, but then it was an opportunity for them to say, you know what, I should be producing this, so I'm going to step out and go do that. A lot of the guys, that I know that were session players then became producers because they had such a strong opinion or vision of like, hey, I could be doing this. And so, engaging that at the right time is important. But if you're called in to be on the session, you're expected to supply, the drum parts for a project, but also maybe you get called, like Larry Carlton, I'll use him, he was also hired to be the arranger for Steely Dan, to do some of those arrangements on those records. So David does this, I'll do this on a session. We're there together and say, hey, right there, maybe you should hold that one chord 2 more beats, or this re-intro is too long, let's chop it in half. So because of our experience, the guys that you're working with, you'll learn things about what works, what doesn't. But listening and being aware of the melody, the sections of the song, intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, breakdown, endings, those are all important components of any song that you're going to play.
How important is having excellent technique?
Yeah, the technique, I think, I've heard this from guys doing clinics. You need as much technique in order to express yourself or get your ideas out. But that's the one thing I'm always working on, is to maintain a level of consistency with it, and trying to learn new ideas, new rhythms. But knowing when to use it is really key and important. Most of the stuff, like I said, I've worked on, it's not featuring me in the sense that they want something really flashy. And this is to that point, I always tell people, I've never been hired to just play a drum solo. So if you're coming at, my whole thing is about drum solos, and then you're going to try to put that into a musical situation, sure, it might not work so successfully. So I always tell those guys, hey man, that's what you're doing is fantastic. Start writing your own songs so that you can hire guys to play your music, because what you're doing is phenomenal. Or, it's sort of like tapping on the window. Hey, do you understand what it is you're doing? Because it's not necessarily appropriate for playing, at a wedding, or playing whatever, at a club or something where it's just so over the top with chops, and blah, 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 blah. It's, it is cool to listen to. It's flashy, but there's a time and place for it. So certain guys will call me, hey, remember that part you played on that album? And I have to go back and listen. I go, oh, wow, I forgot that I actually played like that on that record. But I'm always coming from it from a groove standpoint first. I don't have a set solo. Okay, I'm going to play John Ferraro solo number 101. I don't know what that is. And when you're doing a concert tour where it's a big stage, maybe you do need to come up with stuff like that. I was watching videos of some of the big bands that are out there, and it's the segment where, okay, now it's time for the drum solo. Yeah, they're going to work stuff out with lights and cues, and certain things might happen a certain way that you structure it. And I've had to do that a few times, but not too often. So the technique is important, but the main takeaway for that is how to play with different implements. You got any brushes? Why? Mind painting my house? So the right technique in order to play different volume levels is really the main takeaway for me.
Is versatility important? For example, knowing how to play or sing several different styles of music authentically? How is this beneficial, and does it help you make more money?
Yes, and yes. So, yeah, all those I would have to agree with, meaning, yeah, that's been my calling card is, people talk about a skill level and they'll say, oh, this guy's like the what they call the Swiss Army knife, so you're popping open all these different blades or whatever. So yeah, it's part of my deal that I've been fortunate, because I like all the music that I get a chance to play. Some guys, I used to do the judging for the drum contests every year. They didn't have it this year at Guitar Center. And you'd hear these kids come in with, man, they're playing, their feet are way faster than what I can play with my hands. So they're modeling their playing after one or two bands that just play that one style. So their whole solo is based around that idea. Sure. Some of the other guys you might hear, and they'll come in, they might start off with brushes or even playing with their hands, then going to mallets. Like they have a more of a percussion concept and broad approach. Maybe they went to music school and were able to gain those skills. And it's much more of an interesting journey what they're going to play. So there's a value to all of it, and it's great expression. So versatility has been a calling card for me. I like just about every kind of music and love the challenge of playing it. Now with commute time in the car, I've got Sirius Radio, so I'll have several different stations programmed, and I'll purposely change it, excuse me, just so I can hear what's going on. What's going on in the country station? What's going on in the gospel station? what's going on the R&B station. There's so many little takeaways with the grooves and how they all overlap too with the technique.
So is it, when you're listening, you're not just listening for pleasure's sake, but you're actually analyzing and checking it out and trying to figure out, what you can learn from it? And would that be a good way to learn versatility?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point, David. That's a great question and well worded. Yeah, you're listening to it from an analytical standpoint because you want to know not only what are the drums doing, because I like listening. When I was younger, I had a good friend that when we would jam together, he goes, "What are you listening to?" And I go, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Are you hearing what the sax is doing and what the bass is doing and the keyboard?" Ding, the light went off. It's like, oh yeah, hey, I'm part of this whole thing, the pie, we talked about earlier, part of that piece of the puzzle. So, obviously I'm going to listen first to what the drums are doing just to say, oh, okay, it's a 1 measure pattern. Oh, it's a 2 measure pattern. Oh, he's playing side stick. Oh, it's got cracked open hi-hat. Oh, he goes to the cymbal. I can go down the list within the 3.5 minutes and kind of have an idea of what's going on most records, or most pop things. It's interior listening, meaning instrument specific, but it's also knowing what's the riff of the song, what's the vocal doing.
Every style of music has standard repertoire, also known as standards in some genres. How important is it to know these pieces, and how does it help you earn money?
Yeah, also a great point. Pretty important to know most of them. And then if I don't know the song, I'm right away going to lean on somebody else in the rhythm section or someone else that's got a good listening skill and say, what is this song? Never heard it. And they might be able to say, oh, it's kind of a country 2-beat. Oh, it's just, it's 4 on the floor, 16th note. So now I've got some, I know what that means or a general idea of it. Or if everyone's going, gee, I don't know, it kind of just goes like this, then you're at the mercy of, wow, what am I gleaning for rhythmic support? But almost all the guys I've been fortunate to work with, we all try to help each other. Even if it's the opposite scene, if there's a musician that doesn't know what the part is, I can just say, hey, it's just backbeat guitar on 2 and 4, or it's 8th note strum, jinga, jinga, jinga. So I have enough general knowledge. I can't tell you what the chord progression is probably, but this comes from the awareness, and like you said, having a good knowledge of set lists, pop songs, and I don't even know there's a resource where you can get that, but knowing how to play all these current songs. Every year I'll get sent lists for different bands that I might play with on a New Year's Eve gig. So I've saved a lot of these lists. So I have them, and I'm trying to use them with my students just so they have a start point of like, here's what you need to know, and those are the songs, like you said, are going to help you jump right into a situation where the repertoire to play a dance gig, the repertoire to play a jazz standards gig. And a lot of guys will have real books, built into their iPads or phones so you can quickly get there. And also knowing how to play, for you guys, it's an issue of what key are we in, working with a different singer, and they're playing in some odd keys. Well, then you got to be able to transpose right on the spot, which is always remarkable.
Point. Yeah.
It's not as much of a concern for me. Like I said, we're in the easy seat when it comes to that. But, wow, now you're going to look at a chart, and sometimes they have a way to transpose the changes. But, if it's written in C and then they want to do it in G sharp or something crazy, or, F flat or whatever, just some bizarro, C flat. Oh, well, wait a minute, isn't that, So I've seen these conversations go on where it's usually a singer, not only male or female, that doesn't quite know what they're doing maybe with their keys. And so, they don't know how to lead the band when they're giving instruction and say, okay, I do this song in this key at this tempo. It's kind of common courtesy, but piano players have to pick up the pieces of that so many times to kind of, make it happen. But yeah, my instrument, you do need to know tempos and volumes and the arrangements of the songs, whatever it is, and do your homework. Ask for the set list ahead of time if you're going to work with a band that you've never played with. Say, do you guys have a set list? Because I just want to check out some of the songs you're going to do, and do you do it at album tempo, or do you have your own arrangements? And they may not have even thought about it because they just do it automatically with the same personnel and I'm the guy that's coming to fill in on, hey, can you help us out? Our guy got sick or he's out of town.
Right.
So chances are, I'll be able to represent, well enough so it feels like it's effortless for them. That's my concern.
Sure. I have lists that I used to give my students.
Yes.
Standards list of like jazz standards, classical standards, Brazilian standards, that kind of thing. One of the things I wanted to add was that for current music standards, I used to always tell them to go to Billboard online. Because
that's
find out exactly what the current stuff is.
Yeah. I like that. I'm going to use that as a takeaway from our session here. But that Billboard, that would be a good way to see what's current, what's out there, and to stay up. So that's a great resource, David, the top Billboard Top 100. And I've done that before recently, or I'll take like a period of time. What's the top 100 songs for the last 20 years, or for the last, from 1980 to 1990, from 2010 to 2020. Then you can kind of lock in, decades at a time.
Do you do a lot of self-promotion to obtain work? How much time do you spend on it, and do you obtain most of your work through self-promotion, word-of-mouth referrals, or an equal amount of both?
Definitely it's word of mouth. I would say about 80%. Or maybe even more. Yeah, maybe even more than I think about it. Self-promotion, I'm not a super high presence on the internet. I'm on Facebook probably way too much, just, reading stuff. And sometimes it makes me upset. It's like, oh, this is dumb. What am I doing? But you'll notice a lot of people are always commenting on things or liking things or making sure that they're kind of connected with the community. I actually kind of it burns me out to a point. And then you've also got Instagram, LinkedIn, some of those other things. I've got the accounts, but I don't check in as often. But I don't see guys necessarily putting out, hey, I'm available for hire, but also, staying in touch with the community. A quick story from the 1980s when I was touring with Barry Manilow for 2 or 3 years, got off that gig. And then I had guys 10 or almost 15 years later, hey, are you still working for so-and-so? It's like, well, no, I haven't done that. But back then, before the internet stuff, there would have been no way for them to know. Whereas nowadays, maybe you're on a tour. Obviously, this year it's been no tours, but you can say, hey, I'm in town, I'm available, or, just got back from the such and such tour. And so now people know you're there, that they can quickly say, oh, wait, he's back. Let's give him a call. I want to work with him. So I don't do a lot of that necessarily. And then, of course, you've got the Throwback Thursday thing or whatever. So a lot of people post some of their videos from previous events, previous gigs. Sure. And that's kind of fun. You get to see guys, oh man, remember that tour? Yeah, I got to see those guys when they played here, and people are posting stuff like that all the time. So as far as like a conscious newsletter blast, I should probably do something like that. Even just like, here's my monthly calendar. I'll be playing this coming Sunday at Campus Jacks with the Brick Alley Blues Band, which we hope we are, playing tonight up in LA at a private function, so people don't have access to that maybe as much as they might want to with a calendar. So I don't, like, here's what I'm doing this week. Hey, it's me. I'm not good at that. And I sort of like, don't like to so the networking thing is important. Like you said, I would say most of it is word of mouth. And maybe even I think we've talked about where you went through a list of guys who would just call and say, hey man, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. Oh man, I'm glad you called. I got this project next week. What are you doing? Can you come do the gig? Oh yeah, okay. It's not like you're saying, hey, I'm desperate, help me. But it's just you're staying and it's relationship oriented and you're trying to maintain, connection.
How important is a musician's or vocalist's attitude in a work environment? What situations have you come across where a particular person's attitude affected a work environment, or even if they got the job to begin with?
Well, to me, it's a large component of it because, if you've got sort of a bad attitude or something's wrong or you're not talking about issues and this happens, I've seen it with guys who have been playing together a long time maybe, and I'm coming into sub, so there's no conversation between the guys in that band. And it's kind of sad, there's a laundry list probably of, gripes or grievances amongst them. So it's kind of a painful experience. You go, man, that wasn't fun at all. Flip side of that coin is you come in and everybody is so pumped to be there. Man, I'm so looking forward to this, getting to play with David Enos, and I've got, so-and-so on keyboard and this guy on guitar, and we got a horn section. Man, and these singers are great. So everybody is like, it's all up, and, we're going to have a ball. So those gigs go by, it feels like you're there for 10 minutes. The other scenario, the first one, it feels like you're there for 10 weeks, and you're going, oh my God, this can't end soon enough. So I always say, find a way to make it fun,
Right.
And just try to stay in the moment and resolve those conflicts if you can, with the person that you're having the conflict with, and just keep it kind of non-hostile and, civil and just common courtesy, the golden rule, just treating people, the way you want to be treated. But there are times when you got to call people out and say, hey, wait a minute, you're overstepping a bounds here. You can't talk to me that way, or, how would you feel if I said that to you? Sometimes people blow their top and you don't know what's going on in their personal life. And if it's a leader or a high pressure situation with a client, there's a lot of micromanagement going on. So you have to be able to be versatile, or flexible is probably the word, and go with the flow of what's happening within a certain parameter. There's obviously boundaries within that.
What does professionalism mean to you? For example, attire, punctuality, etc.
That entails a number of detailed things, just showing up on time, just all like practical stuff. Once again, it's not like you're doing anything differently, but the lack of awareness sometimes is surprising to me with musicians, that all they've done is practice their instrument and hone their skills and not think about other ideas. Do you have a dependable car? Do you have a way to get to the gig? Do you have a little bit of cash in your pocket in case you have to pay for parking? Showing up with early, showing up with the right gear, the right attire. You're always asking, what do you want us to wear? Knowing how to ask questions or find out the information, usually via the phone or internet. I'll give you a quick example of what used to happen, and I had to learn how to kind of screen it. Many years ago, I'd get a call, and it'd be something like this. Hey, John, what are you doing next Thursday? And, oh, nothing. Oh, well, good. I've got this gig, and it's in San Diego, and it pays $50. And I go, oh, now what do I do? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, great. You good for it? Yeah, okay, sure. And you go, what am I doing? So you're going to drive all the way down there, drive all the way back. And it might be, you don't know the guys, or you don't know the guys. Whereas now, if that call comes in, hey, John, what are you doing next Thursday? I don't know. What do you got going? So now we've opened up the thing. Well, I've got this really cool gig. It's only going to be an hour. You're going to make $1,000, and it's 10 minutes away from where you live. Oh, of course, I'd love to do that. Just that's, what is it we always talk about too is
fame, fun, and fortune.
Yes, that's your mantra. So, and that's been very enlightening to me. We've been fortunate and blessed to get a chance to work together with Dick Van Dyke. Yeah. And to me, that hits all three of those marks. It's fame, it's fortune, and it's fun. The guy's a sweetheart of a guy. We love doing that. Yeah. So that's not always going to be the case. And so, but yeah, knowing how to ask, some questions or send an email. Okay, yeah, I'm going to be there. Do you know what the load in is like? Is there a stage? Is there a parking area? We talked about earlier, having some cash in your pocket because you may have to tip a valet. You may have to do something. Yeah, save the receipt. It might be reimbursable from the people that you're working for. Or there's so many variables that you don't know what's going to happen once you show up. So trying to be prepared for it as best as possible. Are we playing outdoors? Is it in the sun? Oh, it might rain. So having maybe a jacket or a hat or sunglasses, music stand light. That's a big one. And Here's my biggest pet peeve with the entire music business for sessions. Hey, John, can I borrow your pencil? It's like, wait a minute. Why don't you have your own pencil? So in my stick bag, I probably got about 10 or 12 pencils at all times, because that's something that guys overlook. And that's a really, you're a pro. You should have like your toolkit. You've got your guitar strings. You've got your tuner. You've got your little clipper, snipper. I've got drum key. I've got a wrench. I've got, the rug, the things that you need for your instrument. But man, please, everybody, bring your pencils.
I hate to admit it, but I've been guilty of that myself.
So what we all have. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone in particular by any means, but to me, it's kind of funny. But you would overlook something like that, and then I'm guilty. Yeah. Where maybe I don't have my music stand light, or I don't have a music stand. I've got a few that can fold up. So these are like just kind of basic things. Having the right shoes, maybe, I don't know. If you're outside and it's slippery, having, the right socks. Hopefully you're, smell okay. I mean, there's just some guys will show up, man. And these guys have been on a binger, maybe not so much anymore. But why would you jeopardize your future employment opportunity by getting hammered and then having some charts thrown at you? Oh my gosh, wait a minute, now I got to try to read. I've never done that personally, but I've seen guys that have kind of gotten a little too, one toke over the line kind of, and that's like, oh, now the band, everything else suffers from it. It's just common courtesy, being presentable and looking professional. Some people are really picky about that. And when I've done other tours where they've actually had wardrobe people that prepare all the costuming, then you just show up and it's hanging in the dressing room and okay, here's what I'm wearing tonight. Boom. A lot of the big rock tours and things like that, they've got a specific person that handles all that. Sure. Even like a request, what are we going to wear tonight? Is it all black? Or no, we want white shirt with a bow tie, or we just want, open collar. Hey guys, black t-shirt, black suit. So all these little different variables with each case scenario.
How important is it to work on your weak areas as opposed to things you are comfortable with?
Well, I think it's good to do both, meaning I'll go back and listen to things again with a fresh ear. Even if it's a song that I think I might know, I'll learn something about it. And as far as working on the weaker parts, that's the challenge, because you sort of don't know, maybe unless yourself, you got to get in. Maybe you see something on YouTube or Facebook of a guy doing something interesting, so that, I'm going to try to explore that, and that's a good source. Now there's a lot of resources to be able to dive into that. So you do need to spend a portion of time exploring that. I probably don't do it enough. And then, diving into a new pursuit with trying to study those rhythms. But I have other musicians that have told me stuff like, hey, why don't you check out this Moroccan groove? It's like, wow, what's that? I don't even know. So then they'll send you a link and you get to play some new ideas. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of a, 6/8 kind of 4/4 together. But I need to be more conscious of it myself and try to keep the skill level up. A lot of it too is emulating drum machines, which I'm not that good at, to be honest, but I watch YouTube things. And guys have different implements on the set now. They're putting, muffling or tambourines or metallic things that make the drums sound electronic. You go, whoa, that's cool.
In your opinion, what are your favorite must-have albums, individual tracks, or music-related books to own that have influenced you, should be mandatory to own regarding work-related education, or are considered historically important that you can recommend to our viewers?
Yeah, the drum books that I've used are kind of what I call the tried, true, and tested. There's one that's written by a guy, it's called Ted Reed Syncopation. Here's what it looks like. It's right there on my music stand. So I still use this every day and with my students as well, because it's got a wealth of information for basically playing in 4/4 and learning about eighth notes, ties, dots on notes, triplets, and some 16th notes. So it's kind of got really the most of the stuff that most, situations you're going to play. Another good sight reading book is that Modern Reading Text. Let me see if I have it here in the stack. In 4/4 time. Yeah, I do. So this is written by Louis Nelson.
Yeah.
This is a good text just for sight reading practice. And then you've got stick control, which is just very, snare drum intensive sticking exercises. There's a number of good books by a number of our contemporaries, with styles and things like that. But sure. To me, I like to dive into it myself and use it, because years ago, you'd have to transcribe stuff. You wouldn't have the advantage of the videos that are there to present it. So those books there will cover a lot of bases. There's another one that's called The Advanced Techniques for the Modern Drummer that was written by Jim Chapin. And they're talking mainly about swing kind of patterns and how you play swing patterns. A lot of the linear drum books, I've looked at them. I'm not that deep into them as far as learning it. There's another one, what's it called? I got to think. It's Gary Chester is the author, and I can't think of what it's called. That's a really complex book because he basically has each limb doing something different. So it requires a lot of slow practice, and it's very tedious. But mainly, if I'm going to dedicate, like if I have a practice routine, I know I have a half hour, I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes on just the pad doing snare drum. Then the next 20 minutes, it's either learning songs, sight reading, or working on coordination. And so you can compartmentalize your time, the use of time, like what is it you're practicing? That's an important aspect of this. Now, as far as songs or albums and things, kind of it's your own personal preference. I mean, for me, obviously, I grew up, first being aware of music in the early 60s. And then, the journey to listen to other songs. I remember where I was, so 16 when I heard the first Led Zeppelin album. And then, all the Buddy Rich stuff you'd get exposed to. So then you sort of go on this journey. You talk to other people, other musicians, that they're listening to things that you might not be aware of. And now, fast forward that, I was like, you meet a new musician that you haven't played with. And I always can tell, it's like, oh, okay. After the first 5 or 10 minutes, you go, oh, we have a lot of the same albums in our collection, meaning we've listened to similar things, so we instantly know how to make songs feel a certain way.
Sure.
So that's always fascinating and fun. And, if some guys have their whole career has only been playing in the same band, so that's a fascinating idea to me, how they continue to grow. But for all of us, we played in so many different situations with so many great players that inspire us. And they might turn you on to something new. I remember at college, a guy saying, hey, check out Airto, great Brazilian percussionist. So I got way into that. I was like, oh, this is great. And then that kind of led to the Chick Corea thing, which might lead to, Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock. And you're going down this lineage trail and finding out who all the players are. In fact, I've even seen, like, in some of the studios, they'll have like a poster that's got the tree and all the different connections with all the different people. It's kind of interesting. So there again, that might be an online resource where you could actually look that up and, get connected with some really great music and styles. And then regionally too, around this country, you've got certain grooves that are definitive, Chicago style blues, Texas style blues, New Orleans style music, West Coast jazz, East Coast jazz, Bay Area funk, Seattle grunge, each of these regions, Nashville country. I mean, there's a whole bunch more, all kinds of matches in between. So, being well schooled craftsman, sideman, listening person, you got to explore all that. And then, of course, the rest of the world, all of Europe, all of Asia, Africa, it's endless. You can really go on so many, there's so much to know and so much to learn. So I just encourage, musicians to keep discovering new ideas, new grooves, new ways to play this instrument, which is not that old. I was on a summit about 2 weeks ago. I got invited by the staff, the guys from USC music department, Aaron Serfate, who's a great Venezuelan drummer. You played with him. Yeah. And so they just had a forum with Alex Acuna, Ignacio Berroa, Jeff Hamilton, nice. Peter Erskine. All these guys were just having kind of an open forum chat. And they actually had a guy live from Brazil, and I forgot his name, but he was on there. And they were just talking about all different kinds of things that were very fascinating, with mostly kind of jazz conversation, but how their country and how their journey of how they learned about jazz and brought their heritage with them as well. The Latin guys had some great things to say, how they discovered jazz and how they play it. So
what specifically impresses you, and what are your specific main complaints about vocalists, pianists, guitarists, bassists, and drummers?
Where should I start with this one? I'll start with the rhythm section as a whole. It's if they're not listening to the volume level that kind of I'm dictating, and I'm not always correct. I'll be the first to say it. But in other words, you've got certain instruments that are going to maybe be too loud, and so then I got to, physically, or well, not physically, what's the word? Make a request like, hey man, can you? And I do it in a way it's like servant oriented. It's not like, hey, you're too loud. It's like, hey, I have could you help me out by just playing a little bit softer on the verses, because I'm getting the look from the singer that it's just too loud. So if those guys aren't listening if we're all not listening to each other, chances are there might be a potential problem. And here again, if one of the keyboard player is the leader or the guitar player is the leader, they've got a lot on their mind. So you don't want to have to give them extra details of things to worry about. And they might be the one that's playing too loud or too soft. Right. Now with singers, there again, I'm always trying to make them as comfortable as possible. So it is a dynamic change, Sure. The chorus of the song get louder, but that verse has to come way down. And you don't learn that. I mean, I still struggle with that sometimes where I'm just plowing through it. But, certain singers, maybe they have, just like we talked about a little bit earlier, a version of a song that they like to do that you might not be familiar with. So then if they don't know how to describe it to the entire band, it can become a problem, meaning that you're going to have all these guys experimenting while you're trying to play the song, and it might be wrong choices. And it changes textures too. You've got, not everybody has to be playing all the time. That's a very overlooked aspect where, it's great when you just got a breakdown and it's just bass and the voice, or you've got a verse where it's just, hi-hat and guitar and voice. Or, obviously we just talked about these intros, or it might just be the piano, the keyboard, for the first intro and the first verse. You don't even come in until the second verse. So shaping and tapering the music, the instinct, some of it's well defined of when you're supposed to come in. Other times you can just make your own arrangements as you're doing it. And it's fun to work with singers who are musicians that are aware of these type of changes, so they'll lead, and I'm following the emotional level a lot of times of what they're doing. If they're going to get really loud, I try to get loud. If they're getting really soft, of course. So it's a bit of common sense, but you're not just in your workstation doing your job with blinders on. Right. For especially live music, it's an interactive thing that's going to happen one time right there, and that's it. Studio is a different animal because you have a chance to revisit things and analyze them and maybe have a different approach, which that's another key component too, is oftentimes I'll always have at least 2 or 3 ideas in mind of how I want to approach the song. And, most of the time it might be correct, like 70 or 80%, but sometimes maybe the arranger or producer will say, here's what we're thinking. And then they can explain the idea. I go, oh, that's great. I'd love to do that. And then you quickly have to have the technique, skill level to achieve that for them. It's not like they're asking you to play, or they might say, hey, can you just play that part, but don't, use your bass drum. Oh, okay. Or, I don't want any hi-hat. I just want kick and snare. So oftentimes you'll see guys who'll be playing, you're keeping time with the 8th note, but you're not playing anything. You're just, because you're so used to motion when you're playing a groove, but they just want kick, snare. And so in order to keep it feeling like the way it would if the other part was there with the hi-hat.
What question didn't I ask that you think I should have? Are there any other perspectives you'd like to share not already covered on any other subject that you think are relevant to work skills?
Oh, well, I think you've asked a number of really great questions that, I was trying to dig deep to kind of come up with some answers for.
Thank you, John.
All right, David. Thank you.
Have a great day, huh?
So, you too. I'm signing off. Yep. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button